Hi everyone, and welcome to Get Sleepy, the podcast where we listen, we relax, and we get sleepy. I'm your host, Thomas. Thank you for tuning in. Sam Jarvis is back to read to us tonight. I know many of you love Sam's soft, soothing voice, and you've been asking to hear more from her, so I hope you enjoy tonight's episode. In this particularly dreamy and creative story, we'll be following a woman named Morgan, who has a deep passion for mythology, especially the myths and legends of King Arthur. On a visit to the rocky ruins of Tintagel Castle, King Arthur's palace, Morgan discovers something unexpected about both the castle and herself. As always, we have an exclusive bonus episode coming up tomorrow on Get Sleepy Premium. I'll be narrating a really relaxing travel story set in Scotland on the Isle of Skye, where a collection of natural pools create a magical atmosphere. If you'd like to hear that and get all of the other benefits of being a premium member, like ad-free access to our entire back catalogue and 30% discount on merchandise, then simply go to getsleepy.com/support, or just follow the link in the show notes to learn more. And another great way you can support the podcast is by supporting our sponsors. And tonight, I'd like to say thanks to BetterHelp for supporting the show. If you feel as though there's something interfering with your happiness or holding you back from achieving your goals, then I really would recommend you check out BetterHelp. Therapy and counselling is such a powerful and important thing that you can do for yourself. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can message your therapist anytime, and you'll be able to arrange weekly video or phone sessions from the comfort of your home. There's a broad range of expertise available, and you can change your counsellor at any time if needed. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. So visit betterhelp.com/getsleepy. That's better HELP, and you'll receive 10% off your first month. Over 1 million people are already taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional, and so can you. Remember to use our special offer for Get Sleepy listeners of 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/getsleepy. So now, just take a moment to settle in and make sure you're comfortable. And then let your breathing just draw out a little longer. And as you do that, just gradually turn your attention inward, focusing on the body and the mind. If your mind feels busy right now, it's absolutely normal and something that you can just accept. I've often found myself getting really frustrated by having a busy mind at night. But it's important that we don't punish ourselves with more distress. So instead of resisting or trying to block out your thoughts, as you breathe in and out, just allow your mind to do as it pleases for a few moments. And now gently bring your attention to the breath. Feel the air flowing in through your nose, filling up your lungs, and then easing back out through your nose or mouth. And if it helps to do so, you can just place one or both of your hands on your stomach and really engage in that sense of rise and fall. That natural, ever-present rhythm of your body. And it's a rhythm that we can always come back to if our mind wanders off. I hope you'll enjoy a beautiful sleep tonight. Just relax and listen along. I'll hand over to Sam for our story. Our adventure begins on the western coast of England, where towering rocky shores protect the ruins of an old castle.
Hotel Camelot stood proud, high on the windswept headland of Tintagel. Its windows looked out over the tempestuous Celtic Sea. Morgan wandered down the long, winding drive leading up to the hotel. The structure certainly looked much more like a castle than it did a bed and breakfast. The four corners of Hotel Camelot rose much taller than the rest of the building, each turret adorned with a Cornish flag waving in the breeze. At the top of the hotel's four walls, the thick stone had been given a toothed effect. It was the sort of thing you might find beautifully described in a fairy tale. But Morgan knew that, historically, the uneven top to a castle was about far more than beauty. Long, long ago, the raised part of the tooth-shaped parapet offered knights defending king and country a protected view of the land. It was clear to Morgan that the stunning Hotel Camelot had stood on this hilltop, surveying the coastline and guarding Arthur's ancient ruins for generations. But those decades were not a scratch on the history of Tintagel Castle, the ruins of which stood on the rocky cliff top behind Morgan. The castle had guarded this coastline from Saxon invaders for centuries. That's why Morgan had come here, to finally unravel the legend of King Arthur and see the ruins he left behind. History was Morgan's greatest passion. She'd seen ruins all over the world and watched the past crumbling away, worn down by the seasons, by tides and by time. She'd watched the golden sun set over Machu Picchu and seen it rise on a crisp morning between the towering marble columns of the Parthenon in Athens. Tomorrow, Morgan would finally see where so many of the legends famed throughout the British Isles had first been uttered into history. Stories travelled differently back then. They were carried across land and time by word of mouth. Mother to son, father to daughter, that's how the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table would have been told. That boy or girl would one day grow up and retell the same tale to their own children. That's how history was recorded in the Dark Ages, when Arthur was said to have lived. Morgan thought it was better that way. A book, however good the tale between its pages, could be easily lost. Its long and winding story quickly forgotten without the ink and paper. But a well-told story, shaped by a silver tongue, filled the air around you and crept into your bones. It stuck in your mind and coloured your dreams. Mischief chased in the corners of Morgan's eyes. Though generally quiet and bookish, within the young woman was an undeniable need to unfurl the mysteries of the past, and King Arthur was perhaps the greatest mystery of all. Pushing through the heavy mahogany doors at the front of the hotel, Morgan stepped into the warmth. The doors swung shut behind her, and the comforting quiet of the lobby welcomed her arrival. Stepping inside Hotel Camelot was a lot like cracking open a time capsule. All kinds of artifacts gathered from across the country were presented in glass cases along the walls. Dug up pottery and salvaged glassware, shining swords and coppery coins were all protected by the clean glass cases and lit by the velvet green lampshades on the walls. Large red rugs emblazoned with the Arthurian crest laid atop of hardwood floors, and just like the one that Arthur would have had at court. It was a replica, of course, but a good one. Perhaps the best that Morgan had ever seen, she thought, upon closer inspection, running her fingers over the names engraved into its surface. Legend had it that Arthur insisted upon meeting with his knights at a round table so that all could be equally placed around it, and none could boast they had the highest position at the table. Padding across the rich red rug, past the deep sofas set before the roaring fire in the living room, Morgan came to the reception desk. Behind it sat an older woman with her nose in a book and her brow furrowed. Her snowy white hair was tied in a knot on top of her head, and though she wore glasses to read, a second pair with bigger frames and thicker lenses hung from a string of pearls around her neck. When she heard Morgan approach, she nestled a bookmark into the margin and folded the pages shut around it. The cover of the book was old and ornate, nothing like the paperbacks Morgan was used to reading. She looked up at the younger woman before swapping her glasses over and pushing the larger pair up the bridge of her nose. "You all right there, my love?" she asked in a lilting Cornish accent. The woman wore a name badge just above her heart that read Cassandra. "Hi, I'm Morgan. I have a reservation," she explained. Cassandra leafed through the pages of the diary before her until she came to the girl's name. "There you are. Morgan Fay, is it?" Cassandra checked, earning a nod from the young woman. "All right, so that's room 12 with 2 nights' bed and breakfast prepaid," she confirmed, rummaging in the desk drawer for the key before handing it over the counter. "Take a right at the top of the stairs and go all the way along to the end of the corridor. All right, my love?" Morgan thanked the woman before heading upstairs. She ran her hand along the curve of the banister, the mahogany feeling waxy and smooth beneath her palm. Following Cassandra's instructions, she made for the end of the corridor, counting the doors as she went. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Morgan stopped in her tracks. The door that should have been labelled 6 didn't have a number at all. Upon it was a small sign that read "Private" and a big old key begging to be turned in the lock. Whoever had left the key here had obviously done so by mistake. Unable to contain her curiosity, Morgan peered over her shoulders to check the coast was clear before turning the key in the lock, pushing open the door and slipping inside. Morgan wasn't sure what she had been expecting. A laundry cupboard, perhaps, but certainly not this. Behind the door marked "Private" was something far greater and far more beautiful. Away from the prying eyes of the other guests, Morgan found herself inside a library, an old one and, evidently, a secret one. The air was perfectly still inside the library. The room smelled sweet and smoky all at once. The crackle of the fire burning at the far end of the room was the only thing that disturbed this peaceful place. Precious books crowded tall bookshelves, and high on the slate walls hung a tapestry rich with colour and detail. Its stitches told the story of a different time, and Morgan felt honoured to even stand before the scene. She marvelled at the craft almost forgotten by the modern world. Though we might take pictures whenever we want nowadays, we would never weave the kind of life into an image as the people who had toiled for hours over needle and thread had been able to. Driven by a need to eternalize a single moment in time, they had stitched Arthur into history. Morgan weaved between the shelves, tracing her fingertips over the spines of the books as she passed. On the final shelf, the book covers seemed more faded and the paper between them more tired. Certainly these were far older works of literature than the books that had filled the shelves before. The final book, at the very end of the top shelf, was bound in red leather and embossed with gold lettering. History of the Kings of England, Morgan read. gently easing the book from its shelf. She padded across a rug rolled out over the slate floor and found herself a window seat across from the fire. The cozy nook built into the window was piled high with blankets and cushions. Morgan eased herself into it, nestling into the cushions and pulling a soft, warm blanket around her shoulders. Just a few pages, she thought, relaxing deeper into the seat and enjoying a view of the dramatic Cornish coastline. Beyond the window, rabbits nibbled at the rolling, wind-swept grass on the headland, and the infamous ruins she'd be touring tomorrow cast shadows in the lazy evening light. Beside the window seat stood a small round table with a candlestick and matches resting atop of it. The library grew dim as evening turned to night, and so Morgan took a match and struck it against the side of the box. She lit the candle before blowing out the match and enjoyed the smell of it smouldering. The book before Morgan was full of tall tales, myths and legends. It detailed the history of the kings of Britain, telling Arthur's story of heroism in vivid and beautiful description. As Morgan read on, unpicking the past, her candle began to flicker. A fire that had roared across from her was now but glowing golden embers smouldering in the hearth. As Morgan turned the page of her book, it was enough to blow out the already weak candle. For a moment, the library grew darker around her. It was a sleepy place, warm and cozy and quiet. Morgan would have allowed her eyes to drift shut, curling up in the window and drifting off to sleep, had she not been in the middle of one of her favourite Arthurian legends. She fumbled for the matches and struck yet another. Having relit the candle, she set it down once more, its light filling the room. Morgan noticed all at once that the library cast by candlelight again seemed to have changed shape around her. Instead of books, scrolls tied with red velvet ribbons filled the shelves. Torch flames adorned the slate walls this time, and Morgan's window seat was a window no more. It had become more of a nook, if anything, one piled high with thick quilts that boasted the Arthurian crest. Morgan placed her book down beside her, standing to explore the library that had just transformed around her. Perhaps this was why Hotel Camelot was so keen to keep the library a secret, because some of the magic in Arthur's stories had escaped into the very fabric of the building itself. Morgan pushed back through the door that had once been marked private and found herself in the middle of a vast courtyard on a blustery but warm summer's evening. High castle walls protected Morgan from most of the breeze. She paused for a moment, breathed deeply, and turned in a slow circle on her heels, surveying the courtyard around her. She'd seen this exact scene before, drawn in to history books. Morgan knew exactly where and, more precisely, when she was. The walls of Tintagel Castle were tall and strong. Almost immediately, Morgan recognized this to be the upper courtyard of King Arthur's birthplace. Below, she could hear the gentle tinkering of a lute, perhaps a musician brought to entertain the court guests, she thought. Ducking under the archways that lined the edge of the courtyard, Morgan followed the path they protected from the elements all the way to the steps leading in to the lower courtyard. The soft sounds of the lute growing closer to her ear. The lower courtyard looked like something out of a dream in the gentle evening light. In the center of it, a man stood before a statue of the king, plucked masterfully at the lute. Women in grand, floating gowns stood by, enjoying the lilt of the music at their ear. walls were embellished with beads that would twinkle beautifully by the candlelight at the feasts hosted in the castle's great hall. As the lute player landed on his final chord, the doors to the great hall swung open, and the court guests meandered idly towards the glowing candlelight within. Morgan followed Arthur's guests into the great hall, stepping through the grand, heavy wooden doors. The warmth of the roaring fire and candlelight within wrapped around her. A room of such impressive scale, the great hall was certainly cozy. Great wooden beams supported the vaulted ceiling, and the last of the evening light refracted through the vibrant stained glass seams that mirrored each other at either end of the feasting hall. Below, on the smooth, silvery slate ground, were tables laden with plates of fresh vegetables picked from the castle's own allotments, meats, rich oils and wines. The room smelled divine. As the guests dug in and piled their plates high, Morgan took the opportunity to truly explore the castle without prying eyes to disturb her. The castle seemed quieter, with no one to crowd it, sleepier. Morgan followed the path from the grand hall down the steps to the workshops. The castle walls weren't as high here, and she could just catch a glimpse of the sea beyond the headland, glowing silvery in the moonlight. Most of the craftsmen seemed to be off feasting, their workshops shut up for the night. But in the furthest cobbled building, the candles were still lit. Her curiosity piqued, Morgan followed the sloping path down towards the workshop. Once stood before its thick wooden door, she could feel the warmth of a fire emanating from inside. Morgan pushed lightly on the door to find that it was already open. Welcomed by the warmth, Morgan stepped inside and received her second surprise of the day. Having half expected to find another blacksmith spinning the midnight oil, shoeing horses and sharpening swords, she was surprised to find what looked much more like a laboratory or a kitchen. Shelves crowded with books and countertops buried beneath gemstones, oils and herbs filled the space. Hunched over a small cauldron suspended above the fire at the end of the workshop was an old man. He had a long, white beard and even longer, wispy white hair. He wore a purple velvet cloak embellished with gold thread stitched into the shape of the moon and the stars. Sitting on top of his head was a pointed hat of the same rich velvet, and in his hand a book far heavier than a man his age ought to have been able to carry with such ease. The man looked up at Morgan with a kind, knowing smile. "You're right on time," he said, placing the book on the counter beside him and beckoning Morgan over. "I've gathered most of the ingredients already," he explained, and as she came to stand beside him, she realized that this was no ordinary book. This was a spell book, and the aged man stood beside her was no man at all, but a wizard. Merlin, advisor and sorcerer to King Arthur himself. Merlin began to read instructions from his spellbook and motioned to the ingredients on the countertop. Morgan followed his method, chopping fresh wheatgrass and finding powdered crystals salvaged from the caves below the headland at low tide. She added fine salts imported from Morocco and lavender from the fields. It was relaxing work, following Merlin's instructions, finding the ingredients and preparing them before dropping them gently into the cauldron above the fire. When the potion had finally come together, the ingredients created a sweet-smelling, lilac-colored liquid. The wizard took a ladle from a hook beside the hearth and spooned some of the potion into a glass vial. Taking a piece of parchment from the countertop and dipping a long feathered quill beautiful dream gently massage 2 drops into the temples. Lay back and drift off into a deep, deep sleep. He secured the label he'd just fashioned over the top of the vial using a piece of golden thread, the same color as the one woven into his cloak. In the candlelight, as the fire wore down, he turned to the next page in the spell book and revealed a short poem. At least, that's what Morgan had thought it to be. Merlin took her hands and folded them around the top of the vial before wrapping his own around its base. He asked the young woman if she would read the incantation from the book with him, that together their power might give the potion more influence. Morgan nodded in agreement and, taking a deep breath, pressed her fingers into the warmed glass of the vial. She recited the spell with the wizard. A silvery sea below a silvery moon, in the silvery dreams our spell brings to you. Safe and sound dreams abound, warm and bright, sleep deep through the night, and when you wake, you'll feel anew, refreshed by deep dreams our potion brings you. The incantation falling easily off of her tongue, Morgan removed the top of the vial, dipped her smallest finger into the warm potion within, and dabbed 2 drops on each temple. Sitting back into the deep armchair in the corner of Merlin's workshop, she gently massaged the potion into her temples. Her eyelids grew heavy once more. Morgan sighed out the day, enjoying the way her muscles seemed to relax deeper into the armchair every time she exhaled. She closed her eyes for a moment, anticipating the beautiful dreams her potion might bring. But just then, she remembered to blow out the candle beside her. Her eyes fluttered open once more, and as they did, she realized that she was no longer sitting snug in the corner of Merlin's workshop, but nestled back into the window seat in Camelot's secret library. The book, The History of the Kings of England, was still open in her hands. Turning lazily and somewhat confused to the final chapter of the book, something caught Morgan's sleepy eyes. There, on the last page of King Arthur's story, she noticed her name, Morgan Fay. The book described her as having been the bright apprentice to the great sorcerer Merlin during the time that he advised the king. If that wasn't proof enough of Morgan's mark on history, beside the extract was an illustration. The drawing was old, but its detail exquisite. The illustration depicted the old wizard wrapped up warm in his cloak, spellbook in hand, peering down into a cauldron, and beside him a young woman chopping fresh herbs, wearing the same clothes as Morgan was wearing now. Morgan closed the book, setting it down beside her. She leaned towards the candle and gently blew it out, sinking back into her window seat and drifting off into a deep, deep sleep, forever written into her favorite legend, a sense of peace washed over Morgan as she drifted off into beautiful, restful dreams. A soft smile played at the corners of her mouth. She was safe in the knowledge that she had forever earned her seat around Arthur's